We're here at the Center for Colorado Women's History in Denver, Colorado, with artist and historian Chloé Duplessis. We got to meet a while back at the Sister Rosetta Tharpe exhibition, where I first got an experience of your ancestral work. Here we are, a few months later, with your latest exhibition, Focus on Art, Healing Harm, and the inspiration came 3 years ago. So we're going to do a walkthrough on 12 tablecloths.
Abby, I was really struck when I took a research trip about 3 years ago to New Orleans about all the things I've been hearing about the Whitney. So, the Whitney, now called the Whitney Institute, but the Whitney Plantation Museum and Institute is a source of so many points of view and historical areas of intention. And I knew that as a historian, I really wanted to go with an open heart. So I went and received a beautiful tour at the Whitney with Yvonne Therese Holden, who was the director of education at the time. And over 4 hours, we toured the entire plantation. Now, this plantation is important because, for one, it was a working plantation until the 1970s. So that part. Right. But additionally, because of the role of this plantation, because of the role of the South, and because of the role of slavery, as a historian that really focuses on creating works that promote accessibility, history, and healing, I was intrigued by the daily work. And I think oftentimes, particularly as a woman, I move through life and I'm very surprised consistently that people are apt to kind of minimize the daily work of womanhood. So I really wanted to find a way to share the information about this show, about this plantation, about these women in a very different way. And I did not know what that would be. I just knew I would carry something when I left there. And it was probably about hour three of the tour when we went to the house behind the main house, which would have been where they were preparing and cooking food. And I asked Yvonne to share with me the story of the women working there. And she mentioned to me kind of their daily schedule. And it wasn't until she said, this is where they would actually wash the 12 tablecloths that I was just like, wait, hold up. What? Why?
Yeah,
All the things.
12.
12 tablecloths. So I asked her to explain that. And she said essentially, they had 3 meals. And at every meal, there was the expectation of having between 10 and 12 courses. And there was an expectation of having crisp, clean tablecloths for every course. So she continued to talk, but frankly, I just went inward and I was thinking to myself, like, what must the women's life been like? What was a day like that? What would that entail? I mean, the continuous washing and cleaning and cleansing. So we finished the tour, and after we left on the drive back to New Orleans, I'm a very talkative person. I love people. I love engaging. It was funny because my husband was like, "Are you okay?" And I said nothing for like
Just
45 minutes.
internally processing.
It was sitting with me, and it literally took me almost a year and a half to fully process the show. Once I got back to Denver, friends reached out and they were just like, "How was your show?" I was like, "My show was great." And they were like, "Well, how was the Whitney?" I was like, "Honey, I can't even talk about the Whitney right now. You should go, but I can't talk about it." I was just carrying it. And then I remember waking up literally around 3 in the morning, like a year and a half later, and I had a dream. And in the dream, I was going into the main house. But Abby, I was serving the women. The women were seated. I was serving them. I was honoring them. And I woke up and I had chills and I was like, "That's it. I'm going to reclaim the table." And my husband was just like, "What are we talking about?" So I ran downstairs and like in 30 minutes or so, just sketched out the entire show, including the summary. And then for the next 2 years, I literally carried the show because, we're based here in Denver, love Denver. But about 3 or 4 months a year, we travel based upon invitation. So every time I go somewhere, I would be looking to see if it would be a good space, a good home for the show. And I just didn't find the right space until I was actually sent here. And I do mean sent. So we went to go support the Buffalo Soldier exhibit in Fort Garland, which is extraordinary for those who've been to see it. If you haven't been to see it, please go and support History Colorado and Eric and his team there. And when we went there, I was sharing kind of what I've been working on. Eric then refers me to Susan, who's a director here, Susan Fries, at the Center for Colorado Women's History. So I came actually bring another show. I've been doing a lot of work around Kathy Williams, the only known female Buffalo soldier. I created a show for her that traveled the country. So I came actually bringing her story. And it wasn't until the last few minutes of the interview, an engagement session, when Susan said, "Are you working on anything else?" And I was like, "Oh, wait, I got this tablecloth situation that is beautiful." And she said, "Tell me about it." So we're sitting down and I'm sharing the story about the women and their daily walk and all the things about womanhood and labor and what it means to serve.
Mm.
And Susan's eyes just gradually got bigger and bigger and bigger. And she's like, so yeah, let's find a way to do that if you feel comfortable doing that. So we walked through the house, and at the time, this dining room was pristine and white and very, very
Just like polished.
yes. So much so that when you walk into this space, you would not necessarily be inclined to touch a thing.
Mm.
You know, the table was longer, it was more formal. And of course, all the things in this room are the property of the home. And with this home being the buyer's Evans home, the significance of what that means in Denver and for Colorado history, it really provided me with a new opportunity to kind of reimagine the show. So the show is the same show that I carried for those years,
Mhm.
but I believe partnering with History Colorado and the Center for Colorado Women's History allowed me to expand the story. Because when Susan first said, "You can bring it here, we'd be honored to have it here," the first thing I said was, there are so many people that don't believe that the story of slavery is a story of the entire country. It's very convenient to tuck that away, as a scourge of the South.
Yeah.
I said, so as a historian, I've been creating awareness around the fact that this is our collective history. It's our shared history. We are all together for years. I said, but with this show, I don't want to necessarily focus on that because it takes energy away from these women. We're honoring these women, restoring these women. And then she said, well, there was a woman of color who served in this house. And I was like, what? Yeah. So Myrtle Grant served in this house for almost 20 years, and she lived here in Denver. She's originally from Missouri, but she had a home in Five Points. She raised a family,
Mm.
and she was the woman of color of this house. So when I got that information, Abby, I was just like, there we go. That's our sixth woman.
The link. And when was she here in this house?
She was here in the 30s. Late 30s, 40s, early 50s. She
Okay.
transitioned mid 50s, but she was here long enough for the women in her family to come with her sometimes to help, to support, to serve. So through that one woman, you have almost six different women who are linked to her
Mm.
genetically who came in to help to keep things going. Because keep in mind, there are no dryers, there is no washer. It's a dark, dank space, 2 rooms off of this room. It's hot,
No air conditioning.
no air
just in the
conditioning,
heat.
in the heat, just moving, twirling, all the things. And if she ever, wasn't feeling her best or had something, another commitment, you had to keep that going because the people in the house aren't necessarily concerned with what you have going on. Um, like
Yeah.
many bosses, they just want things to kind of continue.
Right.
So once I found out about her story, I was like, that's it. We're going to, instead of honoring 5 women, we're honoring 6 women. And that was our intentional attempt to not only bring slavery to the rest of the country because it bankrolled the entire country in the early development of the country, but also to honor someone who physically worked here in this beautiful house.
Wow, that's amazing. The connection to Colorado from all the way in the South in Louisiana. So in this corner, we have an altar to this woman in the house, Myrtle
Yes.
Grant.
So Myrtle Grant served here late 30s to early 50s. And this was a part of her daily work. Now, she had many other jobs. She was a caterer, which is, of course, super cool because, of course, people of color actually started the profession of catering in
Oh,
Philly.
wow. I didn't know that.
So one of the great things about that was I respectfully asked her granddaughter, Navoyo, if I could do her story. Because whenever I do installations and there's a living descendant, I feel it's proper to ask for permission because that's your people, right?
Of course.
That's your
Yeah, it's
family.
her family.
So she granted permission, and I really wanted to honor her wishes. And she said, please just ensure that it's a full It's a full telling of it. So she was a laundress in this house, and she did work extensively and tirelessly to support the people of this house
Mhm.
by doing the laundry and maintaining that. But also, too, she had, she was an entrepreneur. She was engaged. She did purchase her home in 5 points in cash,
Mm.
back in like the 30s and 40s, which is
That's
extraordinary.
huge. Yeah,
That's
my
hard to do now.
gosh. Yeah.
So she was just someone who was driven and compassionate and committed to doing this work and to showing up to ensure that future generations could kind of have that mobility that was promised. But that's one of the founding virtues of our country. So she followed that through. So what you'll see is this temporary altar for Myrtle. We have the washboard and the wash basin, which would have been very similar to what she would have used when she was working in the home. We have the vintage clothespins, which are literally almost 80 years old, which is
Wow.
why they're covered. And down the bottom, I wanted to include a few things that you would not technically think of when you're thinking about someone who is doing laundry,
Right.
because for many of us and for many of our ancestors, they may have been called, required, or requested to do one job, but found themselves doing other jobs. So
Mm. Like
cooking, seeing to children, like all the
keeping
things,
the house up
keeping the
in
house
all
up
ways. Yeah.
in all the ways. So we really wanted to honor the notion that for many people serving, it really was a situation of just doing what was the order of the day, the call of the day, what was required. And this is a handmade table covering of burlap. The burlap is consistent through the show. I use burlap because for me, it represents the resiliency of people of color in this country. And I just wanted to be consistent in that. So this is a piece sewn just for her, to honor Miss Myrtle. And we're deeply proud of the fact that she served in this house and that we have the capacity to honor her. And her altar is actually just 2 rooms off of the room where she served for 20 years.
Wow, that's incredible. And you were able to connect with her living descendant
Yes.
who was able to come and see the show?
She was. It was, Abby, it was so moving. So, because Miss Navoyo came here with her grandmother when she was about 4 or 5, it was a really tough time. She did not necessarily have the most joyful memories of the house.
Mhm.
And she had kind of set the intention that she was not coming back, frankly. She would prefer not to come back for all that the house represented. Because keep in
Mm.
mind, Black people couldn't come this far into the house. They were only serving there in that role, and they didn't serve anywhere else in the house. The Byers Evans home has only had Swedish domestic servants, so people of color were only allowed to do certain things here.
Oh, okay. So roaming the house were these white domestic servants and then back
Laundry,
there doing
yeah.
the hard work.
Yeah. Which is one of the things that actually struck me, Abby, because I was thinking, when you think in terms of service and domestic servitude, why is it that, particularly in our country, certain roles are relegated to certain people or certain classes of people based upon hue? So if it's physical labor, like the picking, the pulling, all the things, it's usually Black and brown people, essentially.
Mm.
And then depending on where you are and your point of view and your experience, the higher you get in the house, the lighter the hue of the skin
Mm.
across all levels, not just here in Denver, but there as well. So that really struck me as well, and I really wanted to kind of highlight in the tour. So when people come to actually have the in-depth tour here, like the one we're having this afternoon, they actually get a little bit of more inside information on what it was like to serve, how colorism and the history of color plays a role in that, and to some degree still does
Mm.
in terms of how we serve in the world of labor in
Mm.
our country. But that was very important to honor that as well. And she came to the show and she stood right over here by this door, and she was deeply moved to be in this room. I think it also was important to note that when she came for the show, when we opened it the first weekend in June,
Mhm.
that was the first time she'd ever set foot in this room.
The emotions that she must have been feeling.
It was it was really special to have her here. It was really special to have the 20 plus other people who just came for the opening, who had no connection to her,
Mhm.
to be here as she experienced it. And at one point, just the beautiful person that she is, she was so overcome she had to excuse herself. Because keep in mind, we're observing this as artists and arts enthusiasts and people who love history and culture. This is her direct bloodline. Out of everyone that came to that opening, she is the only person that directly has a tie to this house. She is living this legacy. And she's gone on to start schools of arts and culture and live in California and do a lot of great things. So
Hmm.
she's the manifestation, I would assume, of her grandmother's prayers.
Speaking of manifesting, I was so excited to see this next part, which you
Yes.
called the portal.
I call it the portal.
Oh my gosh.
I'm a big fan of Octavia Butler and Black science fiction and all things Afro-futurist. Not necessarily for the reasons you might think. I do enjoy reading. I do enjoy kind of shifting energy in that way.
Hmm.
But particularly for my work, because it's so rooted in the historical spaces of culture, folklore, foodways, you frankly get a lot of heavy stuff. It's not, a walk in the park. So when you are working in an area, in an industry, in a genre where it's heavier, you have to find ways to kind of balance the energy so you can serve with the whole heart. And Afrofuturism is, one of the ways in which for the last 3 or 4 years, I've actually been taking these heavier topics and kind of rinsing and shifting energy.
Mm.
And for those who aren't familiar, of course, the genre of Afrofuturism suggests that there is potentially a time, a space, or an appointed location where Black people, people of color, are safe and whole and well, and that is just edifying to my spirit, particularly because of the last 4 or 5 years we've had in our country.
Hmm.
So the portal is important because once you come into this room for the tour, you take in your surroundings. We anchor the exhibit with the talk and the appreciation of Miss Myrtle, who served here. Then we shift energy. This exhibit covers 3 time periods. It covers the late 1860s, which would have been when the 5 women who were enslaved at the plantation outside of New Orleans served, the early 1900s, which is when Miss Myrtle served in this house, and
Hmm.
then, of course, present day. So I was thinking, how can we time travel? How can we move? And I was like, oh, the portal. So, for the purposes of the show, this portal is a beautiful Samsonite suitcase, which, of course, represents so many things. And it really was a powerful thing to have a good quality piece of luggage. Whether you were moving due to the Great Migration or shifting energy, there is a certain group of people of all backgrounds and experiences who remember having the first Samsonite. So we found this vintage suitcase on one of our sourcing trips, and it just all came together. And you'll see different aspects of the journey in the portal. And in the full tour, I go in depth on every single piece and what it means to honor the women. I like to imagine that they were using the portal to experience parts of aspects of life that they were denied during
Yeah.
their lifetime.
It really just connects all of those time periods, which is so it makes me feel more grounded as someone who, was learning about these lives to be able to see that point where we all intersect and just it gives a peace as well. So
It
yeah.
is. I'm glad that it anchors. That it
Yeah.
feels anchoring. That's the intention for sure. And this piece is
Yeah.
for all. So for those who are unfamiliar with my journey, I am a visual artist, but I'm also legally blind, and I'm losing vision in real time due to a genetic condition. So I am down 40% vision at this point. It continues. The next phase for me will be color blindness, which is why my shows are so vivid, so bright, because I want to celebrate color as long as I can, Abby.
Mm.
But I started working in photography and digital and collage work, and all of my shows used to be inspired by these historical events, right? So it would be about 15 or 17, give or take, pieces just like this of inspired stories. Well, because of my vision loss now, I don't have the capacity to do that the way I once used to, which is
Yeah.
why I shifted into fiber and shifted into installations because it honors my background in history, but also allows me to still serve. But for each show, until my vision goes completely, I do one piece. And that one piece is my hope for the end of the show, what I hope people will take with them. So this piece is called Amber Waves of Green, and you'll see the little amber dots. I have 6 dots on there. They're meant to represent the women that we're honoring. Of course, the burlap is consistent with the piece, and this piece is near and dear to my heart. We have the cotton anchoring the whole situation.
Mm.
But it really is just kind of this creative homage to the women that is kind of sitting right here next to the portal.
And it's almost like a portal back to the show too.
Hmm.
So, oh, that's so beautiful. I want to get back into the history, more of the history elements, which leads us to the next station and a little bit
Yes.
of your work prior to doing art full time. You're a historian as well, which you bring so much of that intentionality and research into your work. And before you were doing full time art, you were practicing in government or in history.
I was. So I'm originally from Louisiana. I've been living here in Denver about 6 years. But I like to say in my past life, I worked in higher education in the university system at my alma mater, the University of New Orleans, and at Tulane University. And then I transitioned to working into government and worked in the mayor's office and in my hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana. And one of my roles there was to actually manage just community engagement and the front office, but also specifically to focus on areas that highlighted the arts and culture. So, this is, goodness, almost 15, 20 years ago. I am forever grateful for that experience because all the things I did in my 20s and early 30s, I hopefully am bringing into my practice now.
Hmm.
But I'm also very keenly aware of the ways in which we can grow and expand, which is why, through our business, Duplessis Art, we do those very unique shows. We do partner with municipalities and small, lesser known spaces because we believe art is for everyone. And when we were planning this installation specifically, this part of the exhibit, it was really important to me to kind of lean on my background in working with government, working with history, to really focus on how to kind of be a connector or source. Like, because when I was carrying the show the first year or so, one of the questions I would often receive is, that's fascinating, but how does it apply to Denver? How does it apply to, the greater United States? And for those who have been blessed to actually view High on the Hog, the Netflix series, they basically roll it out. And for people who are food historians and culture historians, they know that that was the foundation of the country. It was rice. Rice bankroll. The reason we have a Denver Mint a few paces away is because you had the capacity to do so that was garnered from free labor. So I think one of the questions that this exhibit attempts to kind of honor, not answer, but honor, is that the notion of indentured servitude, as some people call it, which is not what slavery was, by the way, for the record,
Hmm.
but the notion of service, working, and slavery is a part of our shared history. And I think one of the challenges that you find is when you minimize that, you minimize the lives of the people who served. So no matter where you grew up, no matter where you were reared or where you can trace your roots to, if you are living right now in the United States of America, then you owe, on some level, mindfully, a debt of gratitude to the enslaved Africans that literally rolled this country out. So this part of the exhibit is meant to honor them in a really loving and respectful way. So you actually see the cotton, we have the rice, we have a beautiful gullah basket. It was really important for us to incorporate aspects of the slave trade in the exhibit. So on this one altar, you have pieces from the coast in Virginia, the coast or outside of Charleston, which is where 40% of the persons who were enslaved came through. It was one of the main ports. And of course, you have things from New Orleans as well. So we just try to honor the coming in of people, the ushering in of people, and do so respectfully. You'll also see vintage cookbooks that I've secured from my travels here, some over 80 years old,
Wow.
with some pretty good recipes, actually.
Yeah.
So when you come here, that's what you see, and it's a sweeping motion with all of those, kind of ending with this beautiful Tiffany-inspired lamp. And I placed that lamp there because I wanted people to give themselves permission to imagine that even though the women are sitting at the table, which anchors the exhibit, that they're not here serving. Maybe they're sharing information, having a beautiful chat. Maybe they're entertaining people or having their loved ones over. All things that they frankly could not have done during your lifetime because they were always working and serving others. So we wanted to kind of have this sweeping motion from right to left and then honor with the lamp, that as well.
Yeah, in the full walkthrough, I know you talked about the sourcing of some of these things. Because not only are you making pieces, but
Mhm.
you have pieces that you're finding, in history. You have pieces of your own past in it. So it's such a
Yeah.
beautiful,
Thank
connected,
you.
tissue of the story. The dress made me emotional when I
Oh,
came through.
how did you feel when you saw the dress?
I mean, when I saw it initially, or when you walked me through it.
Well, I'd love to hear how you felt when you saw it initially, and then after I shared how you felt.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the dress, it felt most familiar because I know that you do the textile work. And I remember the exhibition with Sister Rosetta, you had a dress there that was just so being able to see the dress in the corner, I was excited to see the deeper story. And once you went through it and shared the story within the dress that captured the livelihood of these women, it was just so moving.
And this dress is actually a composite of 3 different dresses the woman would have worn serving, in the house and the plantation, and I think what's really important is not so much the front of the dress, but the back of the dress. And I created this dress and then I cut the dress in half. And that's meant to represent the duality that we all have, the everyday questions to go this way, to go that way, to honor self, to look internally, to look externally, but also to honor what we're carrying. So what you'll see is ancestral fabric from my travels, but also you'll see branches that are actually from like the wooded areas, the coastal areas that are represented in this exhibit. It's also meant to represent the lashings that the women would have received if they got out of line or did not perform up to standard. And for us, for people viewing, I wanted people viewing this dress to really recognize that their story is our story, even if you did not directly experience that. What has been holding you back? What are you carrying? What wounds do you have from childhood or a past experience or a past relationship or workplace situation that you're still kind of nursing? So this, show is not just a restoration for the women. I'm hoping that people will leave here and feel gratitude, but also feel lighter and have a different point of view for their own experience.
Mm.
Because we carry so much, but we thankfully live in a time where we have the tools now to release some of it. That was not their case. That was not their story. And the average lifespan of enslaved persons was between 22 and 26 years of age. So you think about that, and then you're just like, you know what? I can keep going. I got work to do. So it's important for me not to always just represent, the perceived joy of an era. This is not a Gone with the Wind show by any
Right.
means,
Right.
but to present the actual reality, but do so respectfully.
Yeah.
And I think of this entire show, other than the table, more people have come back to me after I give the full description of this dress,
Hmm.
like literally hands trembling.
Yeah, I feel like I gained so much perspective when we got to the dress because we kind of learned about the life expectancy, the difference of the women based upon what role that they had in the house, which goes back to, having such history informed work. You're really doing that. You said in the show, the art healing harm with this
Yeah,
piece and with a lot of your pieces.
yeah.
You go there, you try to bring, the story forward, and it there were many points that I felt like I could relate to, even though I
Mm,
wasn't, in that time period. I could
yes,
I could see it,
Abby. Yeah, that blesses me.
and it leads us back to the table.
Yes, and this is the final point of the exhibit. So, this is the table. This table originally was about 3 to 4 feet longer. It's a formal dining room table. This table is the table that it has been with the house. So, literally for almost over 100 years or so, this was the table. This is where people actually sat and dined and experienced all the things. And at no point did you see someone who was serving sitting at this table. You definitely didn't see a person of color at this table.
Hmm.
But what we wanted to do was take the leaf out, shorten the table, make it more intimate, and really create a space that, in theory, the woman could have dined, could have engaged, could have had a beautiful experience. So you'll see 5 table settings, but you see 6 chairs. And the reason for that is when we were honoring the women, we wanted each person to have a seat at the table. So the 5 table settings represent the 5 women that served at the Whitney Plantation: Francois, Julienne, Sally, Marie, and Lucy Clark. Lucy Clark is the only woman whose last name we know, but we know we only know her last name because of her skill in the kitchen and because she bore several children of the overseer. So again, adding in those layers to the exhibit on how women are viewed, how their capacity is elevated if they are of service. So
Mm,
those markers are throughout the exhibit and just honoring her and her journey. Because I would not even want to imagine what her life was like
mm,
having to navigate all of those planes of service.
mm.
But on the table, you will see what looks to be like a rumpled kind of tablecloth out of burlap. Again, the chosen fabric for the show, but it actually is a rendering of 3 different versions of a map of the actual plantation. So you have the field, the area where the crops would have been. You have what we call back home the levee, the area by the water, the swamp area. And then you move back to where the main house would have been right here. And this is where the woman would have been cooking, preparing, and washing those tablecloths. I wanted that to line up with the table space we have for Miss Myrtle. Now, she does not have a table setting. And for those who come to the full exhibit, they will know why she doesn't
Mhm.
have a table setting. It's deeply moving.
Yeah, it really is. It really
It's
is.
deeply moving, but we wanted to definitely preserve and save some of those beautiful gems of this exhibit for those who have the capacity to come in and share with us.
Absolutely. You mentioned layers, and we saw a few of those layers, but it goes so much
Yeah.
deeper. The connections that you have, not only made within the pieces here, the items that you chose and made for it, but also the lives of these women and the future, what, women now are dealing with. So it's just incredible. I just wanted to get a reflection from you on
Sure.
this kind of work. I mean, it's so deep rooted in history, in
Mhm.
research, but you're also providing like this the healing aspect of it as well. Can you talk about that kind of work, because it's more than just the art exhibition. It's a place and time, it's an honoring.
It is, it is. You were mentioning before that, I shared at one of the tours that this show once Miss Navoyo, the granddaughter of Myrtle, came to the show and was deeply moved and began weeping and sharing how she felt about this tour, and then shared with all of us that there was the first time she set foot in this room, a place where her grandmother worked for 20 years, and her grandmother never even came into this room. There was kind of this collective kind of sigh in the room, and it that registered with me, and I really wanted for every tour we did following that, I wanted that to be something that hopefully I could not reproduce because it happened and that was
Right.
the time, but I wanted to kind of create space for that to happen in a different organic way in all the tours that followed because I feel these women deserve that. They are connected through these twine clothing wash lines, in space and time with Myrtle. They would have never have known Myrtle. They lived in the 1860s. More than likely, most of them transitioned and passed away mid 1880s. Myrtle wasn't even spoken of yet. But I'd like to think that because of the work we're doing with the show, the washing we're doing of the show, the washerwoman role, that when we leave after the tour is over here, maybe they're having conversations. Maybe they're talking about their children. Maybe they're talking about what they want to do. I like for people to, in a way, imagine that we are giving them just a few of the things they didn't have in life.
Mm,
The ability to engage, to connect, to share how tough your day was, or to share a bright spot in your day. And I think that is the core of this exhibit. It is an example of art healing harm. It's an example of restoration. And it's an example of instant community because when we do these tours, they're about 45 minutes to an hour. We do have a Q&A opportunity. People who are in this room, unless they come in a group, they don't know the person next to them.
mm-hmm.
So we have, like the last tour we did, we had somebody from Philadelphia, Iowa, Texas, local persons who were coming from Littleton. And by the time you leave, you have community because you've experienced something. You have been given the opportunity to kind of view something. And when I kind of touch in the full tour about personal experience and shifting energy, I've had so many people, Abby, write to me or message me or come to me and say, I've been dealing with this, and that made me think about this, and I'm prepared to let that go because I'm blessed to live in a time where I can let that go.
Mm.
So the healing is always going to be one of the foundational values of the work. Because I think if you're not focused on the healing and community, then why are we doing this? We're not just rehashing or introducing these tough spaces to people to make them feel uncomfortable. That's not the true intention of the work. It's to honor our shared history. And when you honor the shared history, you honor, on some level, the history of all of the persons whose names we do know and all of the millions that we do not.
Thank you, Chloe, so much.